Most people have never run this calculation. $740 a month times 60 months minus what the car is actually worth when the loan ends. That is the real number, and almost nobody writes it down before they sign anything. Here is what that number means for you. It is not a car payment. It is roughly 10 years of retirement, quietly removed from your life, before you ever notice it happened. This calculation matters because it hides in plain sight. The payment shows up as one small line on a budget, easy to justify, easy to ignore, and because it repeats every single month for years, the brain stops treating it as a decision at all. It becomes background noise. But background noise still costs money. It just costs it quietly, in a direction you're not watching. It also hides because everyone around you is running the same math wrong at the same time, which makes it feel normal instead of expensive. When an entire neighborhood, an entire office, an entire generation finances the same kind of depreciating asset the same way, the behavior stops looking like a financial decision and starts looking like a baseline. Just what people do. Nobody questions the baseline. That's exactly why almost nobody has actually run this number for themselves. The people who get hurt most by not running this number are not the ones who can't afford a car. They're the ones who can, comfortably, and who assume that because the payment fits the budget, the decision must be fine. Comfortable is not the same as correct. A payment can fit perfectly into a paycheck and still be the single most expensive decision that person makes for the next decade. Take Craig. 44 years old, an operations manager outside Columbus, household income around $91,000 a year. In 2019, Craig financed a truck. $738 a month, 60 months, 6.9% interest. He didn't think much of it. The payment fit. The truck was reliable. Everyone around him had a similar payment, so it felt normal, maybe even a little modest by comparison. What Craig didn't calculate, because almost nobody does, is what that same $738 would have become somewhere else. Invested monthly in an index fund averaging 10.5% a year, that exact payment over those exact 60 months grows to roughly $54,000. Not the truck's value, not a trade-in estimate. $54,000 sitting in an account, still growing, while the truck, 5 years later, was worth about $11,000. The difference isn't $43,000. It's $43,000 that never gets a second chance to compound. Money invested at 44 looks very different by 65 than money invested at 54. Run it forward 20 more years at the same rate, untouched, and that single 5-year decision is worth over $300,000 by retirement. One truck. One ordinary decision. $300,000, gone quietly, decade by decade. Now take Vivian. 51 years old, a hospital administrator, similar income to Craig, almost identical lifestyle from the outside. Nobody at her office would guess she drives a 2017 Corolla with 206,000 miles on it. Vivian ran a version of this exact calculation back in 2015, before it was popular to talk about, back when a coworker asked her why she wasn't upgrading. She did the math on paper, at her kitchen table, comparing a new payment against 10 years of compounding, and she never bought a new car again after that afternoon. It wasn't a dramatic decision. Nobody clapped. She didn't announce it to anyone. She simply opened a spreadsheet, wrote down what a new payment would cost her over 5 years, wrote down what that same money could become if it sat in an index fund instead, and looked at the two numbers side by side for a long moment before closing the laptop. That was the entire event. No willpower involved, no lecture, no sacrifice. Just one piece of arithmetic she had never actually seen written down before that night. This pattern shows up across income levels, not just at the extremes. Someone earning $38,000 a year with a $480 used car payment faces the exact same math, scaled down. Roughly $35,000 in invested growth potential over the same 60 months, against a car that depreciates the entire time. Someone earning $140,000 a year with a new luxury payment near $1,100 a month faces the same math, scaled up. Closer to $80,000 in foregone growth over 5 years. The income changes. The mechanism never does. None of this is about blaming Craig or anyone in his position. He did what almost everyone does. He looked at the payment, checked it against his paycheck, and moved on with his life. The same reasonable process millions of people go through every single month without ever seeing the second number waiting on the other side of that decision. There's a second layer most people miss entirely, which is interest itself. On a car loan at 6.9%, roughly the national average right now, a significant portion of every early payment goes toward interest before it even touches the balance. On a 60-month loan for a $48,000 vehicle, the total interest paid over the life of the loan runs close to $9,200. Money that buys nothing, builds no equity, and simply compensates the lender for the privilege of paying slowly. That interest is separate from the depreciation. It's stacked on top of it. Meanwhile, the average American household carrying a car payment right now is also carrying credit card balances at 21 to 24% interest, which means the same paycheck is often financing a depreciating asset with one hand while paying double-digit interest on debt with the other. Nobody sits down and calculates the combined weight of both. It just accumulates in the background, month after month, invisible until a job loss or an emergency forces a real look at the numbers. The measurable difference between Craig and Vivian isn't discipline, and it isn't income. It's one number, calculated once, that changed every car decision that came after it. Vivian's old payments, redirected for 10 straight years, are now worth just under $209,000. Craig is still financing. He's on his second truck since the first one, a new $61,000 loan, $761 a month, 6.9 years remaining. Same income as Vivian. Very different decade ahead of him. Ask Craig today what his retirement account looks like, and he'll tell you it's fine. A little behind, maybe, but fine. The way most people describe a number they haven't actually looked at closely in years. Ask Vivian the same question, and she pulls up an app on her phone without hesitation, because she's checked that number every month since 2015. Ever since the afternoon the two totals first sat side by side on her kitchen table and stopped being an abstract idea. Here's the part that matters most. This isn't about who deserves a nicer car. It's about what most people have never actually calculated for themselves. The real cost of financing depreciation instead of investing the difference. A car loses roughly 20% of its value in the first year alone, and it never gains that back. Every dollar paid toward that loss is a dollar that will never compound, never grow, never show up again in any account with your name on it. Most Americans with a car payment are sending $740 a month, on average, into something that is worth less every single day they own it. Over 5 years, that's $44,400 paid. At the end of it, the car itself is worth around $18,000. The other $26,400 simply disappeared into interest and depreciation. Money that, invested instead, would have quietly become $61,000 over that same period. There's a third version of this worth mentioning, because it shows the calculation working in the opposite direction. Take someone in their late 20s, 26 years old, starting a first full-time job at $52,000 a year. If that person buys a reliable 4-year-old sedan for $14,000 in cash instead of financing a new one at $48,000 and simply invests the difference in payments they never had to make, call it $520 a month for the first 5 years, then continuing that same monthly amount into retirement accounts afterward. The math compounds for nearly 40 years instead of 5. That single early decision, run forward at 10.5% annually until age 65, is worth more than $1.1 million. Not from a higher salary, not from a windfall, from one calculation run once at 26. That's the part that makes this number different from most financial advice. It isn't about sacrifice, and it isn't about denying yourself a car you need. It's about noticing, just once, what a specific monthly amount becomes in 2 different destinations. One that loses value every single day, and one that doesn't. Most people go their entire working life without ever seeing that comparison written down in their own numbers, with their own payment, over their own timeline. Insurance compounds the same blind spot. A new $48,000 vehicle typically carries full coverage near $210 a month, while an older paid-off car in good condition often runs closer to $90 a month for comparable protection. That's another $1,440 a year, every year, quietly folded into the cost of financing something that's losing value regardless of how well it's insured. Add that to the payment itself, and the true monthly cost of the new vehicle is rarely the number printed on the loan document at all. So here's the calculation, laid out plainly, so you can run it on your own situation tonight. Take your current car payment. Multiply it by the number of months remaining on the loan. That is your total remaining cost. Now take that same monthly number and run it through a simple compound growth calculation at 10% annually for the same number of months. That second number is what you're giving up, not what the car costs, what the car costs you twice. If the gap between those two numbers is small, the decision was probably fine. If the gap is $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, that gap is not a car. That's a decade of freedom, quietly financed away one ordinary month at a time. Write down 4 numbers before you do anything else. First, your current monthly payment. Second, the number of months remaining. Third, multiply those two together. That's what you'll actually pay before the loan is gone. Fourth, take that same monthly figure and run it through a compound growth calculation at 10% annually for the same number of months. Most banking apps and free online calculators do this in under 30 seconds. Write both totals side by side on the same piece of paper. Not in your head. On paper, where you can't round the number down to make it feel smaller. Once those two totals are sitting next to each other, the decision stops being emotional. It stops being about whether the car feels earned or whether the payment feels manageable, and becomes a straightforward comparison between two outcomes for the exact same amount of money. That's the only step most people skip. Not the math itself, which takes less than a minute, but the willingness to actually look at both numbers in the same sitting. The fix isn't complicated, and it doesn't require selling the car you already own. It requires one decision going forward. The next time a car payment ends, don't immediately replace it with another one. Take that exact monthly amount, the same $740 you were already comfortable paying, and redirect it into an index fund for even 3 to 5 years before financing anything new. Most people who do this once never go back to financing a depreciating asset again, because they've now seen, in their own account, what that money actually does when it isn't handed to a dealership. This doesn't mean never financing a car again for the rest of your life. It means running the number first, every time, before signing anything, treating the monthly payment as 2 costs instead of 1. What the car costs you at the dealership, and what that same money would have become somewhere else. Once you've seen both numbers for your own situation, the decision either holds up or it doesn't. Either way, you're no longer guessing. Vivian didn't do anything unusual. She ran one calculation on one afternoon at her kitchen table and let the answer change her mind. Craig hasn't run it yet. Not because he can't, but because nobody ever showed him what the second number looks like next to the first one. Look around at the pattern this creates across an entire working life. Someone who runs this calculation once at 30 and adjusts tends to run it again at 35, then 40, then 50. Because once you've seen the real cost written down, it's hard to unsee it. Someone who never runs it once tends to never run it at all, financing one depreciating vehicle after another for 4 decades, wondering at 60 why retirement still feels $30,000 short every single year. It's rarely one bad decision. It's the same ordinary decision, repeated 8 or 9 times across a career, each one quietly closing a door that never gets reopened. None of this requires giving up a car, or driving something unreliable, or living smaller than you want to live. It requires exactly one thing: seeing the second number, the one almost nobody calculates, sitting right next to the one printed on the loan document. Once both numbers exist on the same page, in your own handwriting, the decision belongs to you instead of to whichever payment felt normal at the time. The math doesn't wait. Every month a payment goes out the door instead of into an account. The gap gets a little wider, and the years left for that money to compound get a little shorter. Neither should you. Pull up your loan statement tonight. Find the monthly payment and the months remaining. Run both numbers, what you'll pay and what that same money would become if it went somewhere else instead. Write them side by side on paper before you talk yourself out of looking. Then decide, with the real number sitting in front of you instead